Introduction. This is the diary of George Svarkbacher's epic journey with his then-girlfriend Zita through Canada, the western USA, Mexico, Central America, and South America. They traveled along the Pacific coast all the way to Ushuaia, the southernmost tip of South America, and then back north along the Atlantic side, a 2.5-year adventure. During their travels, they crossed paths with fascinating people, some who welcomed them into their homes with open arms. Their trusty mode of transport was a Volvo 145 station wagon, ingeniously converted into a mobile home with a large wooden box that served as storage and bed. That way they could live out of their car. They mostly parked their car in hotel, motel, hospital or police station parking lots, and slept in the car. This is a story of adventure, discovery, and the open road. George and Zita's journey took them through some of the most stunning and remote corners of the world. They met fascinating people, experienced different cultures, and learned about themselves and the world. George and Zita's journey is a reminder that the best way to see the world is to get out there and explore it. Toronto, July 9, 1975. After some difficulties with the alarm system, we finally left Toronto on Wednesday, July 9, around 9 a.m., heading north. We passed through places we knew well. Parry Sound, however, was the boundary that separated the familiar from the unknown. The landscape with lakes and forests around Parry Sound was replaced by a more monotonous landscape. Bush. Sudbury, an industrial city with significant air pollution. Sault Ste. Marie, an unexpectedly lively small town, 97,000 inhabitants. Flower children were frolicking on the main street until around midnight. We slept in the car in the Holiday Inn parking lot. Very good. Sault Ste. Marie, July 10th. We left the city and after several dozen miles, we witnessed that Ontario is truly a beautiful province. For example, I didn't expect the hills and mountains to reach such heights as we were now privileged to see. Lake Superior, from the viewing platforms, reflects in considerable majesty. It's very good to visit these platforms because the view from them is always worth the effort. Either you seek them out, or you directed to them by signs. Surrounded by endless forests and pristine wilderness, interrupted only by road and railway. Emptiness and silence. Truly beautiful. Near the city of Thunder Bay, I sometimes felt as if in the foothills of high mountains. The roads are very good. Mostly cutting through rocks, receding towards the lake. From one viewpoint, the surrounding landscape looked like a landscape on another planet, bizarre shapes of hills, and weather half stormy, half beautiful, certainly contributed to this impression. We arrived at our stage destination around 9 p.m. and with an empty tank. Gas stations are at considerable distances from each other. I already had to take from my own supplies once, quite inconvenient. Thunder Bay, 180,000 inhabitants, an industrial city with a huge railway station and a busy port. The city center is, after all, different from what we are used to. I thought all cities in Canada were similar. We also went to the cinema drive-in. We spent the night at a motel. Thunder Bay, July 11th. We've gotten used to sleeping in the parking lots of larger hotels. It's quite comfortable, hot water toilet, a chair. In the morning, however, we try to disappear like steam. Around 7 to 8 a.m., I get behind the wheel, and we set off. We then stop along the way to have breakfast. Along the road, there are many so-called picnic areas, where it's pleasant to organize all the necessities of a household on wheels. Thunder Bay was left behind, along with its stormy weather, and with the increasing miles, the rocks began to change into gentle hills, and the stone into sand. Again, just forests, forests, and forests. The wilderness is occasionally interrupted by small lakes, which increase in number towards Kenora. The only larger settlement on this route was Dryden. A few restaurants, gas stations, and shops. The view of the sky was peculiar. Cumulus clouds hung almost within reach. Almost all the lakes and ponds, of which there are thousands here, have names. Who gave them to them? Not a sound of any living thing. Around 10 p.m., we arrived in Kenora, the last major town in the province of Ontario. Now we're really going abroad. Kenora, with its 10,000 inhabitants, was already on the verge of sleep, so we didn't linger either. Kenora, July 12th. A few last miles in Ontario, and we stood at the Manitoba border. A pleasant welcome, tourist information, coffee, maps, all for just a smile and a very nice building constructed for these purposes. Several dozen miles and we were already driving through a plain stretching to the farthest distances. It got significantly warmer. After 120 miles, we stood at the edge of Winnipeg, 500,000 inhabitants. After a brief tour of the city, which we found not very beautiful, we set off on our next journey. This time, however, we changed course and instead of going west, our destination was the remote north. We drove through several smaller settlements, Lundar, Eriksdale, Ashern on Highway 6. The road is very good, but tiring in its monotony. Always straight through forests, sometimes lush, sometimes long dead. The last gas station. I filled up and then just the road, about 100 miles, through no man's land, and again just forests, forests, and more forests. Towards evening, my car's windshield and grille were bombarded by hundreds of flying insects. Around 11 p.m., we finally arrived in the settlement of Grand Rapids. Nice name, ugly settlement. The population is predominantly indigenous. What poverty! Those houses! Alcoholism! It makes one feel a bit uneasy, and they look at you with a gaze that is not just a gaze but also an accusation. It's a difficult question, a problem not easy to solve. One feels sorry for them. They were once the masters of these lands, but today they are members of the lowest social stratum. We found no place to spend the night, so we turned back a bit from our destination into Grand Rapids. It was a very warm night. And moreover, we were bothered by hordes of mosquitoes and all sorts of insects. Grand Rapids, July 13th. We left our post around 10 o'clock. The landscape hasn't fundamentally changed. One just feels that civilization is getting further and further away. Before Thompson, we only stopped briefly at small rapids that flowed from one lake to another. Thompson is surprisingly quite an orderly town, approximate 10,000. However, we didn't linger too long because we had a 200-mile journey to Lynn Lake ahead of us. It was, I think, one of the worst roads I've ever had to drive on. Stone, sand, dust. It was essentially a road to the end of the world. The road did continue for about another 30 miles, but soon ends in that wilderness. We traveled at speeds from 10 to 50 miles per hour. Forests, lakes, and a slightly hilly landscape were the backdrop to our journey. In some places, it seemed as if a human hand had arranged the surroundings of the road with beds of light purple flowers and tufts of white, but of course, that wasn't the case. Just a play of nature. The prevailing face of nature in this case was truly harsh. When the sun began to set and we stood on the top of one of the hills, the forests formed a continuous blanket as far as the eye could see, and in that light, it seemed as if one were standing on the shores of a raging ocean. I was greatly pleased by the observation of the passing landscape, and I think it was worth climbing into these regions. Leaf Rapids, a tiny settlement we sped through, thanks to one of the most perfect roads I've ever driven on. A veritable miracle! Unfortunately, only for 20 miles. Not long after, however, the mining towers of the forgotten fortress of Lynn Lake appeared on the horizon, and we were home. Zita has friends here who live here temporarily, and so we became their guests. Lynn Lake, July 13th to July 22nd. I feel we lingered in this settlement for far too long. It was almost a complete waste of time. The only unusual thing I encountered were small black flies that bit me. While I was busy washing the car, I didn't feel anything at all. However, when I returned home, I was bleeding as if I had been cut. I had several small bleeding wounds on my neck, temples, and in my hair, which became somewhat swollen after 3 to 4 days. Now, after about 7 days, it finally seems that this unpleasantness is beginning to heal. Lynn Lake is a mining town. Nickel is mined here, which spurred the growth of this community, now home to about 3,000 residents. It seems that everything here is somewhat more expensive. Lynn Lake, July 22nd. Around 1:30 p.m., we set off on the next leg of our journey. We had the same route ahead of us, through Leaf Rapids and Thompson, and then along Highway 391 in a southwest direction. This time, however, we didn't turn onto Highway 6 but continued on 391. The landscape remained unchanged: forests, forests, and more forests. Around midnight, we arrived in the town called the Pa. We slept in the hospital parking lot and were disturbed by 3 young troublemakers who rocked our car and tried to open the doors. After a while, however, they left. The Pa, July 23rd. The mornings are still quite cold. We usually wake up around 7 o'clock and set off. Number 10 is a good, fast road, but we drive at a maximum of 60 miles per hour. This has brought me significant savings in gasoline expenses. This speed allows me to travel up to 350 miles on a full tank, $11. In Toronto, I achieved something between 180 to 280 miles. We stopped for breakfast at a nice spot in the middle of the forest. There was also a lookout tower, 10 to 15 meters high, which I couldn't resist. After climbing it, however, I found that we were surrounded only by forests again. It was a very nice view, though. We continued on, stopping for water from a spring. Absolutely beautiful. We picked a full mess kit of raspberries. I photographed the endless forest expanses. I used 28mm, then we passed by Hart Mountain, 2,700 feet. What a change, to see hills almost 1,000 m high dominating this plain from almost every angle of view, and then followed the fertile fields of the province of Manitoba. Silos have really become the dominant feature of the region. Everything is very orderly here, mainly, however, those immense fields of whatever. My attention was drawn to the canary yellow fields in combination with freshly turned black soil, or the green of other crops. They truly created more than unusual views. We bought fresh eggs from farmers, $1 for 24 pieces. Around 7 p.m., we parked at the Binscarth City Campground. Nice swimming pool. This whole area was built for the 100th anniversary of Canada. Binscarth, July 24th. It was one of the coldest nights. Only around sunrise did it begin to warm up, so we let ourselves be lulled back to sleep. We didn't wake up until 10 a.m., had breakfast, and prepared to leave. After Highway 41, we rejoined the Trans-Canada Highway, which we left in Winnipeg. Around 4 p.m., we reached the Saskatchewan border and were given a road map, which we used to head towards the province's capital. On the road, which runs through plains, whether carefully cultivated or not, we didn't see much of interest. However, I often thought about how vast this country is. Finally, Regina emerged from those endless plains. A fairly nice city, typical with its tree-lined streets. After a short stop, we set off again through the lit streets. After a few miles, however, we changed our minds and decided that we had to see this city in daylight. We parked in the parking lot of a residential building. We played cards and then went to sleep. It was a beautiful, mild night. Regina, July 25th. The Parliament Building, various administrative buildings, a theater, a university, all of which are set in a park, and the Wascana River/lake flows through the park. Very refreshing. Everything, the air, the architecture, the flowers, the people. We were greeted by passing people saying, "Good morning." How unusual. I took several photos of the Parliament, the theater, and the university. We did a little shopping and left the city and its daytime bustle. The landscape hardened somewhat. Instead of fertile fields, there was only a gently rolling land covered with grass. Here and there, herds of cattle, a small farm. Moose Jaw was the first larger town on this leg. Its cathedral and high-rise building formed the dominant features of this place. We just drove through, heading towards Swift Current. A strange phenomenon on this stretch. The ground was covered with white dust, and then smaller surface mines were visible for this white mineral, which I unfortunately couldn't identify. Beyond Swift Current, large sand hills were visible. Rolling, covered with dry grass grazed by cattle. Prairie, the right word to describe these regions. What was previously unclear to me is now presented in its full scale. The last miles in Saskatchewan territory. The Alberta Information Center was full of those beautiful photos of the high mountains, but the reality is different. The 150-mile stretch from the Saskatchewan border to Calgary runs practically through the same plain as the previous provinces. There is not much to write about. Only one changed natural gas or oil fields, small machines scattered across these plains turning and turning, bringing good income to Alberta. By the way, there is no tax. Around 10 p.m., we reached the outskirts of Calgary. The illuminated city loomed quite impressively for a city of perhaps around 500,000 inhabitants. After a small dinner at a motor hotel, we went to sleep. Calgary, July 26 to July 29th. The weather was very nice. I was quite annoyed that I had to stay in the city over Saturday and Sunday because I had my Volvo reshoot here. We arrived on Friday evening and Saturday was not enough for me to do everything necessary for the next trip. However, my annoyance did not last long. Calgary is a very handsome city. Especially the city center is large enough for a city that has about 500,000 inhabitants. We visited the Husky Tower, which is the dominant feature of the city visible from all sides. It is perhaps only 200 m, but here in this plain it means a lot. You could see the Rocky Mountains 60 miles away. A very pleasing sight. The city center is like a small Manhattan, many high-rise buildings finished or under construction. The small Bow River flows through the center. Minor inconveniences for foreigners or visitors is the orientation. Many streets are one-way. In the city center, practically every other one, which makes it quite impossible to reach the desired destination on the first or second try. We stayed in the parking lot of the Crossroad Motel, which gave us some comfort again for those few days, at least in terms of personal hygiene. We were very satisfied with our stay in this city, and it is really another discovery. No one would expect it from Cowtown, Calgary. The only annoyance was that I could literally destroy all my photographic equipment here. However, I was lucky and only paid for it with a suitcase which, because it was well built, saved everything stored in it from disaster. Calgary, July 29th. We left Calgary around 6 p.m., and an hour later we were at a beautiful campsite in the vicinity of Bow Valley. The 60 miles we traveled were marked by the nearby mountains. The bad luck was that it was cloudy and those brave giants, still covered in snow, were shrouded in clouds and fog. The campsite was nice though. Stream, forests, and mountains. Three sisters looked up at us from those heights. It was very cold. Bow Valley, July 29th to July 31st. We stayed here for 2 days. I had some trouble, losing pressure, with the new Michelin, so I waited to be able to return to Calgary in case of real trouble. However, the tires relented and so, apart from a few minor adjustments in the arrangement of our mobile home and a 2-day rest, we just lazed around. Around 10 o'clock we left our position and headed towards Banff. The mountains were increasing, the already mentioned three sisters accompanied us, but only before entering Banff National Park did we stand at their feet. The park gates served to pay the entrance fee, $2, information about bears and also registration of all firearms which must be sealed on the spot. After this procedure, we continued for a few miles and were already standing at the gates of the Banff Mountain Resort. It is practically one avenue and a few cross streets. The overall impression is very pleasant. Banff, July 31st to August 7, 1975. We started our stay in Banff with a telephone conversation with our friends in Lynn Lake, where Zita forgot her jacket and shorts. We wanted these items to be sent by mail to Banff, so we waited. The second thing I wanted to arrange here was protective grills for the front window and the car's mask. We found only one workshop here that was able to fulfill this wish, but the price was quite high, $50. After that, however, we devoted ourselves only to tourist purposes. After visiting the local shops, especially those with sports goods, but also the others, we drove along a nice road to the foot of Sulphur Mountain. A beautiful view of the valley and the surrounding mountains, Mount Rundle, Cascade, Norquay. However, the weather here changes almost every hour. Sulphur Mountain also has hot springs that spring to the surface here and are commercially used in the local spa, entrance $1. The springs contain sulfur and some other materials, which causes a slight odor. However, bathing in these spas is a bit exhausting, as the water is 40 degrees Celsius. Another attraction was Mount Norquay. A typical mountain road winding like a snake to its destination, we arrived at a hut from which a cable car leads. However, cable cars are quite expensive, $2.50, so we decided to climb to the viewing platform ourselves. The elevation difference was about 400 meters, but in the middle of the journey, Zita decided to return. However, I persuaded her, and so we reached the top. It took us about an hour. The view was, of course, fantastic. As far as the eye could see, mountains and mountains. We met an elderly couple of farmers from Idaho with whom we spent the rest of the day. We were also invited to their farm. This was confirmed by a friendly drink at the Spring Hotel Banff. This hotel was already familiar to us, as we usually spent our evenings here. A nice view, soft armchairs, and the hotel bustle always attracted us back when there was nothing else to do in the field. We watched an informational film about the beauties and spirit of the national parks, and were spectators of a feast held in the traditions of around 1900. Fun, interesting colors. The history of this hotel begins around 1890. It burned down, was rebuilt, expanded, renovated, and so on and so forth. Today, it looks majestic, proudly into its surroundings, surrounded by mountains, forests, a swimming pool, and golf courses. A paradise for the rich. Lake Minnewanka was another destination of our wanderings, perhaps 5 miles from Banff. A considerably large lake in a dark green color, clear waters, surrounded, of course, by high mountains. We set out on a journey around it, but after about an hour of walking we returned. It was quite warm, but swimming was out of the question. The waters of the lake are ice cold. On the way back to Banff, we saw 2 smaller but no less beautiful lakes named Two Jack Lake, 4,835 feet, 1,660 meters. On the way towards Calgary, a new curiosity, Hoodoos the Indians named them Great Spirits because they believed that these formations, reaching a height of about 10 meters, were their embodiments. Scientifically, however, it was a 1,000-year-old chemical and geological reaction, when I think calcium was crushed by water and slow dripping created this little wonder in the middle of a vast valley. A sadder sight was Lake Vermilion. A dying lake, proof that everything on earth is so temporary. It is slowly overgrown with grass and other vegetation. The last attraction was Sundance Canyon, a fast mountain river carving its way through rocks as if split in two. The elevation difference was a good 100 meters, maybe more. The package arrived, and so the next day we set off towards Chateau Lake Louise. Banff, August 7, 1975. We left the city around 4 p.m. I drove on Road 1A because the traffic on 1, Trans-Canada Highway, is heavy. 1A somewhat hides the view, but we still saw enough. Mt. Eisenhower was almost within reach, and other mountains emerged as soon as the forest that lined the road receded, or when we drove to the top of some hill. We reached Lake Louise in less than an hour. It is just a settlement known only for the extraordinary grouping of mountains near the nearby Chateau Lake Louise, a well-known hotel. Of course, we didn't hesitate and drove straight to the hotel. I knew Chateau Lake Louise from postcards, so I was very curious how it looked in reality. It was a bit cloudy and foggy, but I was still satisfied. A breathtaking view. We couldn't resist, and despite the light rain that started to fall, we went for a walk to the end of the lake. Upon returning, We also peeked into the hotel and went to sleep, parking lot of Chateau Lake Louise. Lake Louise, August 7th to August 13th. It was very cold, so we woke up a bit earlier. We cooked breakfast in one of the nearby campsites, where we met young Americans from New Jersey and California, Keith and Brooks, with whom we then stayed together for several days. That same day, we set out for Lake Moraine, Valley of 10 Peaks. A true miracle. The lake had a blue-green color, clear waters. Surrounded by 10 peaks, mostly snow-covered. I tried to film it, but even if the film succeeds, I don't think it will capture the might and constant change of these beautiful places. Keith and I walked around the entire lake, which was really worth the effort. The journey took about 4.5 hours. The next day, we drove Keith's VW to visit the Columbia ice fields, about 75 miles from Lake Louise. It was a shaky journey, at the end of which stood the Columbia ice fields. We drove up a steep asphalt road to a hut, from where sightseeing tours were organized to this huge glacier. These are special tracked vehicles that, for a fee of $3, take you for a ride on the ice. That was my first impression, of course, incorrect. Glaciers, I don't know if that's the right word, have a life full of changes. They grow, shrink, crack, form, and eventually, partly transform into water, flow through streams, brooks, and rivers to seas and oceans. The Columbia ice fields drain into 3 oceans, which is a certain curiosity. These are the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic Oceans. So far. I will return to this issue later. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to return to Banff because I was not satisfied with the protective grills I had paid dearly for there. It turned out to be a lucky coincidence because when we stood in the mentioned Spa Sulphur Mountain, we met my cousin Eva's whole family there. The meeting was very short because Mita was in a hurry to see all the Banff wonders. However, we agreed to meet in Lake Louise. We had lunch for the last time with our friends, Keith and Brooks, and then parted ways. The grills were not yet finished. I was really angry. I had to wait another hour and a half. However, I used this time for a very interesting observation of bison, which I also photographed. Then I drove back to Lake Louise as fast as possible. I was a bit late from waiting, where I was supposed to meet Eva. Nobody, nowhere. I searched all possible places from campsites to motels, but went to sleep unsuccessful. I hope this mystery will be explained one day, Eva. The next day, I finally returned to the Lake Louise Hotel. It was a beautiful day, but I had a beautiful headache. I wanted to go on a short hike, but I gave up. I only filmed the most common shots and collapsed on the grass, believing that the pain would pass. It didn't. So I went to the car, took pills, and went to sleep. It was a bad day. But we have to go the next day. We are already late. Alaska is waiting. Lake Louise, August 13th. Highway 1 turns west. We head north on Highway 93. In fact, we have already seen half of today's stage of our journey, but it doesn't matter. Personally, I could drive here all my life. It is still amazing for me to observe the constantly connecting chains of mountains. We are not in a hurry. We stop at practically every viewpoint or information point. The first major stop is Peto, a lake in the shape of the map of Italy. Its color is light green, opaque, as if someone had spilled pea green oil paint here. The color of the lake changes twice a year. In winter and spring, the blue color prevails, probably clear. In summer and autumn, the already mentioned green. The cause of this change is sand and dust that is torn away during the melting of the glaciers, which feed the lake. The lake is located deep in the valley. We look down on it from a bird's eye view. There is also a path to it. However, we chose to explore the alpine flora. I made recordings with the movie camera micro. Unprecedented beauty when zoomed in or enlarged. The flowers are mostly small. Another minor stop was the Athabasca Glacier, which I have now recorded on film. This glacier recedes every year. Wherever you are, you feel the presence of this glacier in the form of cold winds blowing from it. Not far from the glacier, as we continued driving, We encountered a herd of bighorn sheep, fearlessly accepting food from people. Just a few miles later, we spotted several mountain goats, and also a bear with 2 cubs. It is usually a big commotion, and traffic on the road is practically stopped. It is really hard to obey the law and not feed them. The bears are really cute. A few more miles and another bear. This time alone. Then deer. This time we were really lucky. Before, we had seen practically no inhabitants of the forest. The road passed, the face of the mountains changed somewhat. I can't say exactly how, but probably in the composition and shapes. A minor stop at Sunwapta Falls and Athabasca Falls. We turned onto road number 93A, which led us to our destination Jasper. We wanted to cook, but we couldn't find any place. I drove to Patricia Lake, turned onto the highway towards Prince George, nothing anywhere. And so we sneaked into one of the campsites, cooked, ate, played cards, and then went back to Jasper to the parking lot of a beautiful motel, where we lay down and slept. Jasper, August 13th to August 18th. When we woke up, we went to see the city. It all seemed a bit different to me than when I was here with my parents. Jasper seemed simpler, more modest compared to Banff. Zita had her hair cut here, like a boy, and now she is complaining. 9 miles of winding, constantly ascending road took us to the foot of Mount Edith Cavell, 11,033 feet 3,677 meters, and its Angel Glacier. Sunny weather. We joined a larger group that had a guide, and so a number of things were explained to us. We had the opportunity to look into the cracks, crevasses, of this glacier, perhaps 10 meters deep, and watch an interesting lecture by an initiated young man. When we returned to the parking lot, we noticed that 3 young men were preparing their mountaineering equipment. We started talking to them and learned that they were preparing to climb Edith Cavell. They were experienced, having been to the Alps, the Rocky Mountains, and the South American Andes. They left before dark, spent the night at the foot of the mountain, and started climbing in the morning. We, along with 3 Americans we met in the morning, went on a hike that turned out to be quite strenuous. We climbed to a peak whose height we estimated to be approximately 3,000 meters. However, it was worth it. It was the most magnificent view I have ever achieved. The most diverse shapes of peaks surrounded us to the farthest distances. I regretted not taking my camera. The return was somewhat easier, but after a march that took us about 7 hours, we were still dead. At the heights we reached, a slight lack of oxygen was already felt. From our position, we then watched our climbers returning. One of them was slightly injured. He slipped and cut his face. The climb took about 7 hours. The next day, we drove back to the city. It was raining. We looked at a few shops, did laundry, went to a restaurant for coffee, and just waited for the next day to continue our scenic drive. Jasper, August 18th. We left Jasper early in the morning. It wasn't raining, but it was foggy and a bit overcast. I was a little annoyed because I was afraid that the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies would not be visible. The last few miles in the province of Alberta, and we were already at the gates of Mount Robson National Park, belonging to the province of BC. The fog began to fall and the clouds broke. Yellowhead Lake was a completely different lake than those in the Rocky Mountains. Brown-green color. The second very beautiful lake on this route was Moose Lake, stretching for almost 10 miles. A few more miles and a sign pointed towards Mount Robson. We parked, but the mountain was covered in clouds for about 2/3 of its height. This giant can rarely be seen in its full beauty. It is high enough and covered with glaciers and snow, which causes the rise of moist western winds that cool on the mountain and create clouds. Well, when the mountain didn't come to us, we went to the mountain. It was a nice trip, full of mud though. The whole area around the mountain was saturated with moisture. Mighty trees, all kinds of ferns and small, rippling streams converged into a fairly mighty, fast mountain river, also fed by the glaciers of Mount Robson. Raspberries along the way and a lot of mushrooms that no one picks. We arrived at Kinney Lake, about 3 miles away. A typical glacier lake. Murky light green and ice cold. Beautiful view, but Mount Robson is still in the clouds. Disappointed, we returned to the car. It was a pleasant evening. To our pleasant surprise, the clouds began to break and Mount Robson was exposed in all its majesty. 12,972 feet, 3,930 meters, but the place from which one sees this mountain is only 2,700 feet above sea level, 818 meters, so one is really crushed by those 10,272 feet, 3,112 meters. The real beauty came at sunset. The mountain was first climbed in 1909, officially in 1913. We were getting ready for dinner when our old friends, mountaineers from Mount Edith Cavell, parked next to us. They came to climb Mount Robson, and so we talked about mountains and mountaineering. Very nice guys, and I think they are quite brave. We originally wanted to continue to Prince George, but we gave up. I happened to have a bottle of wine with me, so we had a drink with the boys for their and our success in our travels. We slept in a small parking lot next to that fast mountain river. It was cold but good. Mount Robson, August 19th. We got up early in the morning. The boys had to make big preparations. Pack and set off on a 12-mile hike to the foot of the mountain. I had an urge to go with them, but we are far behind schedule. We had breakfast and parted with wishes of success. It was a sunny day. The mountains receded to the horizon. Here and there you could see snowy peaks, but basically the landscape now belonged to forests and small farms. Towards Prince George, the settlements were decreasing and one really felt that civilization was moving away. Before entering the city, we came across a highway running straight, only slightly undulating landscape. A memory of Manitoba. We couldn't imagine what Prince George would look like. On the map it is marked as a small settlement. We drove through a few already affiliated villages and thought we were already there. Finally, from one peak we saw this city. Quite large. We drove down the hill, crossed the Fraser River by a bridge and straight to the city center past the train station. The first stop was a big self-service store, where we did a lot of shopping, because we heard that Alaska is very expensive. We were surprised by the range of goods. Better than in Toronto. Especially meat, fruits and vegetables. I just couldn't get sweet juice, but I got that too later. The next stop was Volvo's service. The heating was acting up. I wanted it to be in order, because who knows what Alaska is preparing. Of course, problems. I don't have time, I don't have people, come back in a week. Well, at least he explained what and how, and I found the defect. But I didn't have the necessary part. I left it for the next day, and we went to the swimming pool. Then for tea, where we met a Canadian who hated Americans, but knew a lot about us Czechs, and so we stayed in a friendly conversation, and then we just found an elegant motel and in its parking lot in our Volvo we went to sleep. Prince George, August 20th. In the morning straight to the service. They didn't have the part, so I asked them to fix it themselves. It cost $16 to connect the tubes to a small rubber tee. I was angry. We left Prince George knowing that it is one of the last sections of asphalt roads. The mountains surrounded us again. Formations are probably much older than the rugged Rockies. Rounded on the sides and tops. They proceeded in a mighty chain towards the north. A nice view was of Summit Lake, lying a good 100 to 200 meters below the road. The peak of our progress through these mountains would be Pine Pass, 2,855 feet. Then suddenly the mountains receded. We drove down to the village of Chetwynd and from there towards Dawson Creek. Looking back, you could see peaks without peaks. Quite massive hills, but their peaks as if cut off by a scythe. Dawson Creek, dominating the surrounding area, was a very peaceful-looking town, which we practically just drove through. I'm a little sorry now, because I found out that there are a few monuments to the old gold times. Besides, the Alaska Highway starts or ends here, our next daily bread. Dawson Creek also has silos, exactly the same as in Manitoba or Saskatchewan. The whole area looked very agricultural. fields, farms, silos. I was surprised by this, but then I realized that Dawson Creek is not as far north as it seems from the miles traveled. Besides, it is located on a plain whose altitude is about 600 meters. We refueled and ended the ride in the small town of Fort St. John. We drove its main street up and down and after a little consideration parked at the Mackenzie Inn, a nice motel with a swimming pool, an excellent restaurant, and other amenities. After tea, straight to sleep. Fort St. John, August 21st. In the morning I looked for a garage where I wanted to have a rubber protection for the gas tank installed. They said I didn't need it. Okay. We set off on the last 70 miles of good road. Somewhere in the middle I stopped to install a protective grid against stones. It turned out quite well, the car looked really combative. However, when I drove a few miles, I found that it was absolutely impossible to continue with this grid on the front window. I couldn't see properly. And besides, I would probably go crazy. I removed the grid from the window and put it on the car's mask. It also obstructs the view here, but it's much better. Finally, we came across gravel. It's not that bad. Much better than the road to Lynn Lake. At first, I watched the highway surrounded by forests as it ran forward. I was afraid of holes and potholes. However, the road was built for a speed of around 50 miles per hour, and it seems to be maintained daily. Large plows constantly level its surface. The truth is that it is a muddy or dusty road depending on the weather. However, one always gets the opportunity to try both variants, and it is really hard to say which one is better. The road ran through the forest for a good 50 miles. There was practically nothing to see. Then we drove onto some kind of hill, and here from a small lookout platform you could see a huge land of forests and complete silence. On the right, at least 50 miles away, Trutch Mountain, the second highest point on the Alaskan Highway, loomed. An extraordinary view. However, miles on this road are added slowly, and so we had to continue because Fort Nelson, our destination, was about 150 miles away. The road full of mud twisted up and down, and in some moments it could be seen far ahead of us, running in serpentines to the peaks, or straight in the easier sections of the terrain. We drove around the Trutch Mountains, which loomed on the left side of the road. They were still quite far away, but the view was very interesting. It was cloudy, but the sun could still make its way through small gaps and give these mountains an unusual lighting. I wish I was an expert in filming. I tried to film it and can't wait for the result. The road again plunged into the depths of the forests, and after a few tens of miles it resulted in a complete road horror. I couldn't believe it. It was practically already in Fort Nelson. Mud almost up to the knees, holes in the road. Fortunately, this section was very short, and we finally stood on the asphalt. Fort Nelson is a real hole full of dust and mud. We bought a few things to eat here, parked near a motel, ate a few sandwiches, played cards, and went to sleep. Fort Nelson, August 22nd. Early in the morning we took off. Practically the entire section of today's journey led through a very beautiful mountain landscape. At mile 91 we came across Summit Lake, and immediately after that Summit Lake Pass, 4,250 feet. The peaks of the mountains were covered with snow. The landscape changed only in different mountain formations. A beautiful sight. Another beauty was Muncho Lake. The road ran along its shore for perhaps 5 or even more miles. Light green lake set on one side in forested hills and on the other side surrounded by the road and light cliffs of rocks. Somewhere in the middle there was a very nice cottage, managed I think by Germans. Food, drinks, fresh trout for sale, home-baked bread. It seemed almost unbelievable. Around there wasn't a soul. They probably live off tourism, which is starting to wane at this time of year. We noticed that most of the cars are heading south. We were accompanied or overtaken mainly by trucks. And again on the road. We came across Liard Hot Spring, but we didn't visit them. However, one gentleman informed me that it is a very pleasant experience to immerse oneself in these springs. Maybe on the way back. Whirlpool Rocks was our small stop, as we were looking for a place to cook. The water swirled and turned between the cliffs of rocks and stones. I was almost caught with an empty tank. Gas stations are generally within constant reach, but not this time. But I caught one at the right time. However, they didn't have a premium, and so I had to take the standard. Later I inquired at the Volvo service whether it matters or not. I was told that in summer it's okay, in winter it's not recommended. Great! A few remaining miles through mud and Sodom and Gomorrah, as they say? The car was covered from head to toe with a continuous blanket of mud. When we cross a bridge and under it a beautiful clear river and on its banks a campsite. I turned back and parked. Zita was cooking dinner, and I washed the car in the meantime. Good night. Highland River, August 23rd. We woke up to a sunny day, and after breakfast we set off on another journey. After 30 miles we were at the gates of Watson Lake, Yukon Territory. We visited the Yukon Information Center and talked to an elderly lady who was very nice and helpful. She was just a little confused by the newly introduced metric system, and so we tried to help her. We refueled and drove on. On the other side of the city there is a small place with stakes on which are attached the most diverse signs with the names of cities and settlements, and their possible distance from Watson Lake. This place is said to date back to earlier times when a certain construction worker, longing for home, attached a sign with the name and distance of his homeland. People then followed this example and added new signs here. Today there are hundreds of them and the collection is still growing. We returned to BC once again, just for a few tens of miles. The Cassiar Mountains ran across the Alaskan Highway. The peaks reach heights of over 2,000 meters. A pleasant view. Teslin Lake accompanied us again for several miles. Marsh Lake was a beautiful lake where we stopped to have dinner. The sunset only intensified this image. We wanted to continue to Whitehorse but couldn't resist peeking into a nice cottage serving as a restaurant. There was a small exhibition of stuffed animals, horns and antlers, minerals and all sorts of things more or less interesting. The owners were nice people, and so we started talking. I had a laugh at the bar with 3 other buddies who had just returned from hunting. It was a nice evening and eventually earned us an invitation to stay overnight in one of the lodges. Their owner was Herr Ulrich. A pleasant evening with a glass of wine and friendly conversation. Logs crackled in the fireplace, and we went to sleep in a bed tonight. We had almost forgotten what it was like. Marsh Lake, August 24th. In the morning we sat a little longer over pancakes and hot tea. Then Ulrich led us back to the main road. This connection between the lodge and the road was in terrible condition. Narrow, full of mud and potholes, exposed roots and sharp turns. I don't even know how we got there and back. I thought I would get stuck in it any moment. The car more or less slid in it then drove. We got out of it, said goodbye to our friend and headed towards Whitehorse, the capital of Yukon. We arrived in the city in less than an hour on a generally good road. The car was again dirty up to its ears. I was lucky at the car wash that the machine was broken, and so I washed the car from all sides and top and bottom, and the hot water wouldn't stop. Then we went to the swimming pool. From there we drove to a nearby campsite to cook. On the way I found that I had washed the car too well. At higher speeds the whole car shook in strange vibrations, the origin of which I attributed to that terrible road I had to drive in the morning. I also found that I had a broken windshield. So we decided to spend the night in the city and visit the local Volvo service. After lunch we drove through the city crisscross, which didn't give us much trouble, since Whitehorse is a small city. It started raining again. I found a nice motel and parked. Of course we didn't sleep in the motel, but in the car. Whitehorse, August 25th. It wasn't difficult to find the Volvo service. I already mentioned that the city is not big. I waited for a while, and then with the mechanic we went for a test drive. It was found that the wheels were not balanced, which caused those vibrations. I thought it would only be the front wheels, and so I had them balanced, $11.50. I drove the car onto the highway towards Alaska, and again the vibrations. I returned to the service and was told that I had to have the rear wheels balanced as well, which I soon did, $18.50. Things have improved somewhat, but it's not like before. I have to wait until I get back to civilization. They don't make a big deal out of such little things here. It is normal for cars to be in poor condition, because the operating conditions are terrible. Roads, weather, and many other factors simply do not allow to keep the car in 1A condition. I had the broken window recorded here and sent a letter to my insurance company in Toronto. We left. I was again a little annoyed because I spent $30 practically for nothing. Well, that's life. However, my troubles were soon forgotten. The wonders of nature were once again on display. Stormy weather, dark clouds hung over us. In the distance, however, the sky is almost clear. On the left, the mighty St. Elias Mountains with many peaks exceeding 3,000 to 4,000 meters. The highest mountain of them is Mount Logan, 19,850 feet, reaching almost 6,000 meters. The peaks are of course covered with eternal snow and ice. The sight is truly fantastic. We slowly got out of the storm into beautiful weather and Lake Cluane appeared on the horizon. Hemmed in on both sides by mountains, lit by the setting sun and reaching to the far horizons, it created for us one of the most beautiful sceneries of our entire journey. I couldn't resist, and whether I could or should have continued on my way, I pitched my tent on its shores. Cluane Lake, August 26th. We woke up early in the morning. It was a bit chilly and windy. It was clear, however. The rising sun created new moods over the lake. It was hard to break away. Quick breakfast and back on the road. The mountains receded somewhat to the horizons. The road plunged into the depths of the forests. A few miles behind Beaver Creek was the Canadian Customs. Just a question, whether we have any weapons, rifles not counting. We drove a few more miles and in the distance we saw a standing convoy of vehicles. Something happened to the road. A number of road machines were working on repairs. Within 20 minutes we were on the move again. The road slowly turned to the right. On one side it steeply fell to a mountain river. A few more meters and what we see is a young moose walking along the road. When he noticed us he was a little confused, because he started running in the same direction we were going. I slowed down and the moose finally ran off the road. We reached the American border. The perfect road was a welcome sight. The border control detained my weapon, saying it is forbidden to import weapons into the USA. I don't understand it. On the one hand this, on the other hand they invite tourists to hunt. You need a weapon to hunt. Or not. However, I don't mind, I didn't come to hunt. I'll get the rifle back on the way back. We continue on our way. It started raining again. The road runs through a gently undulating wooded landscape without changes. We stopped here for a change at a restaurant for tea and a piece of cake. After about 50 miles of the same unchanging rainy road, we stop at a settlement and an important crossroads called Talk. We went to the information center and then to sleep. Talk, August 27th. We left the camp around 11 o'clock. It was still raining. We stopped for a small purchase, and also to stretch our bodies. When it rains, bad times come for us, as we lose our living room and kitchen. We go on. Finally it cleared up. A small lake appeared by the road, and so I decided to wash our really dirty car. After a long time, the Volvo was shining again. We got in and drove on. We hadn't gone 5 to 10 miles and in the sun a sign announces construction on a 13-mile section. I didn't take it seriously, signs sometimes lie. In this case, unfortunately, they were not lying. From the beginning, only a slightly disturbed surface, but then the road completely turned upside down. Heavy road machines were forging a new road, digging, carrying, spreading and leveling. The wheel of one of these road golems was bigger than the Volvo itself. When in motion it reminded me of a mill wheel. Only instead of water, it was spraying yellowish mud. After I went through this disaster, all the shining was gone. I was so angry. It was the worst section of the entire Alaskan highway, including that miserable junction between the lodge and the road around Marsh Lake. At 4 p.m. we arrived in Fairbanks. We parked and went for a little walk around the city. Really nothing special. I found that all the cities of the north are too raw, there is nothing to catch on to. Gas stations, a few shops, post office, bank, town hall, and that's it. So we went to a bar. It was busy, prices high. Beer $1.25, Dubonnet $1.50. There was only one thing I couldn't find: a column that marks the end of the Alaska Highway. However, I got postcards. Then we settled in the hall of a motel where we wrote postcards to our friends. We finished this activity almost around 1 o'clock at night. Then we disappeared into our car. It was very cold. The radio reported that night temperatures would drop to 0°C. Well, Alaska. Fairbanks, August 28th. Around the University of Alaska, we got on the new Highway No. 3 connecting Fairbanks with Anchorage. Perfectly built road. It was a beautiful day. Sun, clear, cloudless sky. After many gloomy days, what a comfort. And what luck! I couldn't believe it. I drove a little faster. I was afraid of a change in the weather. Only a few miles behind the city we drove up a hill, and from this distance, equal to about 150 air miles, the Alaska Range could be seen. Snow-white peaks shone through the morning haze. We could not be mistaken. Mount McKinley could possibly be seen at this distance. It surpasses its rivals by almost half its height. It was like a dream. We continue quickly forward. Several more times we are allowed to see the same. We stop and rush forward again. Then several tens of miles, full of expectations, because we lost the mountains from sight. Finally, everything is within reach. The road leads directly into the mountains. On the left, 2 high mountains appeared, all covered with snow. Our imagination worked, and we began to wonder which of them is Mount McKinley. Only the driver of a large truck brought us out of our mistake. The mountain can be seen in the next 50 miles. We drove about 10 miles and a sign announced the entrance gates to Mount McKinley National Park. At the information center we learned that the only way to see the mountain is to take a 66-mile bus ride that takes visitors through the park for free. The journey can be interrupted at practically any time, and you can get on again. Private cars are prohibited from a certain point in the park. They disturb the peace and animals, and besides, the park roads are narrow and quite dangerous. So we switched to a bus. At 3 p.m. we left the visitor center, where we also received more detailed information about life in the park. After a few miles we came across a dusty narrow road, the only communication in the park, next to small trails for hiking. The progress was very slow, but all the more interesting. Along the way we came across moose, deer, mountain goats, a bear and a fox. There were many oohs and ahs, especially when Denali appeared here and there. From the middle of the journey it is covered by the surrounding mountains. The highlight of our climb was Polychrome Pass. Dangerous turns in a road encircling the body of the mountain, protected on one side by the wall of the mountain, on the other side almost perpendicularly falling into the bottomless depths. Wild beauty! Finally we reached Eielson, from where there was an undisturbed view of Mount McKinley. Stunning, fantastic, beautiful and more. Mount McKinley the Alaskan Indians called Denali, the High One. No other mountain in the world, not even those in the Himalayas, rises so dramatically above its base and surroundings. The summit of the mountain, crowned by 2 peaks, the southern, higher, and the northern, rises to a height of 6,194 meters. A full 4,800 meters rushes into these heights alone. We watched Denali for perhaps 3 hours. The sun was setting and creating wonders on the icy armor of the mountain. It's hard to describe, but I hope the camera will give a truer testimony. Even after the sun went down, it was interesting to watch the changing colors coming from gray to blue and finally almost black, but we were already on our way back. The sky was blackening and the first stars appeared. In the darkened sky, once there appeared some streaks with a subtle hint of luminosity, I concluded that they were reflections of the setting sun in the high clouds. However, it was a big mistake. Around midnight we witnessed a magnificent spectacle, the aurora borealis. These flickering, mostly light green, but also pinkish blue lights began to boil, at one point and then, in beautiful curves, constantly changing shape and intensity, began to move from place to place. Sometimes the lights burst almost straight forward. One discharge began to weaken, when the other burst into full force of its mysterious discharge. It was cold, but I couldn't tear myself away from this spectacle. I watched this unusual phenomenon for at least an hour. It was an unusually happy day for us, because it could well have rained. There are not many days in the year like this one, and especially not here, in Mount McKinley National Park. I therefore give thanks to those who intervened for our benefit and good. It was immense. We slept in the parking lot of Mount McKinley Park Station Hotel. Mount McKinley National Park, August 28th to September 1st. We woke up quite early in the morning. It was very cold and clear again. Camping in the park is quite difficult to get, especially the more distant ones, closer to Mount McKinley. So we drove a few miles towards Anchorage, where we found a nice campsite in Mount McKinley Village. We were quite hungry because there was no time to cook yesterday. Then we returned to the park, and slowly drove through the part that is accessible by our own car. I took photos and filmed. We stayed here until sunset, and then returned to the local hotel for a cup of tea. We stayed in the hotel lobby for a few hours, when suddenly someone called that the aurora borealis was visible. This time the phenomenon was not so strong, because the sky was partly covered by clouds. However, I was glad that I had the opportunity to see the aurora borealis once again. Then we went to our salon to sleep. The next day had almost the same content. We returned to our campsite, cooked, and then washed. There was hot running water, a comfort that we had not had the opportunity to use for a long time. It was cloudy. We took a short walk around the area, and when it started to rain we had to return to the car. I had something to do anyway. My diary. I was missing a few days of written reports. By the evening I was done with everything. The weather did not improve, so we returned to the hotel where by chance they were showing a pretty good movie. The Way We Were. Of course we went to see the show since I was born today. We went for a snack to a restaurant. It's usually not better than what we cook ourselves, but it was necessary to somehow distinguish this day from the other days. We intended to go to the mountain once more, but the weather was not on our side. So we drove back and forth and watched life in the tundra. I took photos. One gentleman pointed out a distant, calmly grazing moose. In the evening we went for one obligatory drink. Mount McKinley, September 1st, 1975. We're moving on. Cool morning, patchy clouds. We continue on Highway number 3. For the next few dozen miles, the road was surrounded by mountains and the Alaska Range, which gradually receded. This creates a place for tundra and small lakes. Interesting view. The yellow color of the tundra, overgrown with shrubs and blueberries, we collected a full mess tin of them, disturbed by small mirror shining lakes and snow-capped peaks of mountains in the background. Mount McKinley, which can be seen from this road, was shrouded in clouds. The railway that connects Fairbanks with Anchorage often accompanies the road or vice versa. A nice view was of the road bridge leading across Hurricane Gulp Canyon. Deeply gaping land with a small river flowing turbulently at its bottom. As we approached Anchorage, the traffic noise increased. Every now and then a small settlement or hamlet. We stopped at a small lake for lunch. Before Anchorage, you can see beautiful mountains with snow-capped peaks, which, after passing the Palmer-Anchorage intersection, are shaded by smaller wooded hills that rise directly from the road. And here we were, trapped, for at least 30 minutes in the rush hour. America was celebrating Labor Day. The road then turned into a modern 4-lane highway that led us straight to the heart of the city. We drove through the city a bit and then parked in the Holiday Inn parking lot. We went for coffee and a piece of cake and then for a short walk down one of the main streets. Anchorage, September 2nd to September 3rd. It was cloudy. We walked a little through the streets of the center and visited the tourist information. I was interested in using the ferry from Seward to Valdez, but was dissuaded from this trip by the high prices of this trip, $88. Anchorage was founded in 1914 as a construction center for the Alaskan Railway. The city is located as far west as Hawaii and as far north as Helsinki. Surrounded by the waters of Cook Inlet and Nick Arm, where the tide moves in the range of up to 10 m. We visited the Earthquake Park, inside story of the earthquake, which affected a large area from Anchorage to Valdez on Good Friday 1964. A sad event, today only commemorated by memorial plaques. From here we looked at the airport, which is said to be a busy intersection between America, Europe, and Asia. It wasn't that busy, except for the SAS, JL, and Northwestern Airlines planes, nothing more. However, the number of small planes and seaplanes is surprising. Almost every small settlement, lodge, or cabin has a landing area or a body of water serving air connections. It seems like everyone flies here. It is said that Alaska has the largest number of registered pilots. Here they call them bush pilots. Then we returned to the city and from there headed towards the port. However, the road was closed by the gates of Elmendorf Air Base, a forbidden area for civilians. And so we returned and found a nice place to park on the Nick Arm coast, from where we watched the sunset and the slowly advancing tide. Here we were approached by a lady who noticed our car number. She was originally from Ontario and came to greet us. She warmly recommended the trip to Homer, where we intended to go the next day. It was almost dark, and so we returned to our parking lot of the Holiday Inn Hotel. Anchorage, September 3rd. Early in the morning we left the city, Highway number 1. The road, together with the railway, slowly encircles one of the bays of Cook Inlet. Beautiful scenery! Sparkling reflections of the morning sun in the ruffled waters of the bay, lined with mountains. The road is full of curves and a new view behind every curve. It reminded me a bit of Norway and its fjord region. After about 50 miles we came across a small settlement called Portage. From here it is possible to send a car by rail to nearby Whittier, which is connected to the vast Alaska ferry system. However, we were only interested in the Portage Glacier, about 5 miles away. On the way there from the main road, we saw several smaller glaciers. A very interesting stop was a small crystal clear and ice-cold stream full of salmon, which return here with almost hourly accuracy year after year for their love games. There were at least 30 of them here on a section of perhaps 25 meters. The Portage Glacier was a bit different from most of the glaciers we had seen so far. In most cases, glaciers are located on rocks at considerable heights. Glacial lakes, which are formed by melting in the summer months, appear in considerably lower positions. The Portage Glacier was practically at the level of the road we crossed, and the glacial lake it created directly touched its glacial cliffs, which occasionally detached from the main massif with a turbulent roar. These floating ice mountains created a completely new, unprecedented view. It was unusually cold here, and so we watched the glacier from the car. Then we went for a small breakfast to the restaurant cottage right next door. Then we continued on our way, which now in a large gentle curve surrounded the bay and continued through the beautiful mountain landscape. The previously snow-capped hills were now covered with fresh greenery and dark forests. We entered the territory of Chugach National Forest, 5 million acres. It was a truly beautiful section of the road. Clean, fast-flowing rivers, lakes, mountains, and every now and then a smaller settlement, cabins, or well-maintained campsites. The road passed quickly. The landscape suddenly opened up, the mountains receded into the background. In the last third of the journey, the highway approached the Cook Inlet coast. Nice views of the open sea plains. Our attention was drawn to a small church on a hill where we stopped on the way back. It belongs to the settlement of Ninilchik, founded by early Russian colonization around 1820. Just before Homer we stopped at Anchor Point. A view of the wide surroundings of the sea and snow-capped peaks of mountains. From there we drove down to Homer. The village itself looked like it was undergoing a general overhaul. A dusty road full of holes and potholes led to the center of this settlement. However, I was not satisfied. Homer is known as a fishing base, but there was no sign of nets, boats, and other diverse fishing gear. So I drove down a side street to the water but found nothing I was looking for. Only about a dozen policemen ready to be photographed. I didn't hesitate and pressed the shutter. Then I continued my search. The road went through the whole village, turned and ran onto a, perhaps 2 miles, long promontory, ending somewhere in the middle of Kachemak Bay. And here it was. Lighthouses, nets, cages for catching crabs, crayfish and shrimp, old fishing veterans and their even older boats, seagulls, anchors and also tourists. Colorful spectacle. We drove back and forth, looking and admiring. We went to one shop and bought some of this sea fruit. Very cheap. 1 pound of shrimp 85 cents. Nice salmon, 6 pounds, $4 to $5 and so on and so on. Then I tried to shoot a film. The sun was setting. What a sight! It was truly one of the most interesting places I have ever seen. Where the land ended, someone built a pretty nice hotel bearing the appropriate name, Land End. We parked here and went for the traditional cup of tea. Nothing more for now. By exploring the hotel, I discovered a nice shower, where we washed away the sweat and dust of the Alaskan roads in the last evening hours. Pleasantly tired, we gave ourselves to sleep. Homer, September 4th. Not every morning is the same. Fishermen are early birds. I wanted to catch them in action, and so we got up early. It was around 7:30. We went to the port. A couple of boats returned from night fishing, and I was curious what they brought. We started talking to one of them. He caught perhaps 20 pieces of halibut. The fish was very similar to Dover sole, but many times bigger, even too big. After all, I used to sell them. But I never knew exactly what it looked like. Good education. The second stop was a fisherman who caught several boatloads of shrimp and wanted only 60 cents a pound for them. The traffic in the port was not too busy when we learned that the king crab fishermen had been on strike for 6 months. We went back to the shop once more, bought a few shrimp and had to move on. Time flies. I would have liked to stay here longer, but what can I do? The road is long. We returned along the same road to the Anchorage-Seward Junction, where we turned onto Seward Highway, which led us through a very beautiful landscape to the city of Seward. William H. Seward was a clever man who brokered the purchase of Alaska in 1867 for just $7,200,000. The city was completely destroyed by an earthquake in 1964. Now it is a fairly neat town with beautiful surroundings and a nice harbor. We stayed here for several hours and then continued towards Anchorage. It was already quite late, and so we decided to spend the night at the Portage Glacier. Stormy night. Portage, September 5th. After a stormy night, we thought we deserved a good breakfast, so we went to our already known cottage. No one but us in the restaurant. It was a nasty day, and so we started a conversation that didn't end. It wasn't until around 12 o'clock that we said goodbye and drove on, along the road we had already traveled to Anchorage, where we just refueled and continued. The weather has improved somewhat. We passed Palmer, a small town located in the fertile Matanuska Valley, where huge heads of cabbage, around 30 kilograms, vegetables and grain are grown. Just a few miles past Palmer, the landscape changed. Unusual autumn colors, snowy Talkeetna and Chugach mountains. Real beauty. No man's land, just a few cottages and gas stations. About halfway between Palmer and Glen Ellen, Chugach mountains reach considerable heights. Empty Marcus Baker 13,250 feet. An extraordinary picture. Sparse tundra of almost red color, yellow leaves of trees, bluish distances and snowy glacier peaks of mountains, forests rich in game, waters with fish. Maybe paradise? A little cold. Then followed a section of road without major excitement, miles added on a good road. It was getting late when we came across a bad section of highway. We thought it would only be for a change, but were mistaken. The road hurtled forward in this bad state. But it was night and things around looked worse. The repair of the highway and the construction of the oil pipeline, which ends in Valdez, did its job. We moved slowly. Finally, we got out of this mess and drove down a steep slope to Valdez, called here Switzerland of Alaska. The city looked terrible at night. There was almost nowhere to park because of mud and puddles. Finally, we parked at a rather hungry restaurant. We ordered a few things, but the service was slow and the tea was cold. When we were about to pay, a young man who perhaps ran the restaurant, but also cooked, cleaned and served there informally apologized that our food was not worth anything and the service was the same, and therefore, no charge. We thanked him very politely and left. I was so surprised that I forgot to tip. After all, it wasn't that bad. We found a shelter for us in the vicinity of the Valdez Hospital, where we ended up being chased by the local police for driving on the wrong side of the road. I politely apologized that we were new to the city and therefore did not know what we were doing. It was raining. Valdez, September 6th to September 7th. In the morning we woke up and hurried to the hospital to do all the morning necessities. Exemplary cleanliness, hot cold water. What more could a person want? From there we went to the local campsite, which we had missed yesterday. We cooked something to eat and went back to explore the city. The main reason for our visit to Valdez was the boat connection with Columbia Icefields, which to our grief ended on September 1st. I didn't want to come to terms with it right away, but it was 100% true. The only way to see this attraction was by ferry back to Seward, where we had just arrived from. We gave up. Valdez was also hit by a strong earthquake in 1964, and so the whole city was moved and rebuilt. But even now it looks a bit raw and unfinished. But that is perhaps the fate of all cities on this continent. Everywhere is being built and excavated. The city is really surrounded by mountains and snowy peaks, which must look great if the weather is nice. We didn't have luck this time. Clouds and mists rolled from place to place, revealing a new view and covering the old one. We waited here all day for the overall picture of the city, but we didn't get it. So we had to settle for what we were allowed to see. It was getting late, and so we decided to say goodbye to Alaska with a symbolic drink, because tomorrow we are leaving for the Canadian border. The bar was full. The majority of men prevailed. We sat down next to two guys who immediately started talking to us. They are very proud of their earnings and like to show them off. It didn't take long and they immediately showed us their pay slips. Weekly income around $1,000, after paying taxes $630 net. That's a great income, but living in Alaska comes at a very high cost. We talked about other joys and sorrows and then parted. We went to the hospital, again, it was so cozy there. Valdez, September 7th. We woke up in the clouds, and so we didn't delay any longer. As soon as we left the city and started climbing towards Thompson Pass, 26 miles from Valdez, the weather improved. Finally, we could see what we had only passed through the night before last. We stopped for a while around Blueberry Lake, but it was very windy and cold. We continued through the mountainous landscape to the Worthington Glacier, which we quickly inspected. It is very easily accessible. We already knew the rest of Highway No. 4 to Glen Ellen. At Coconut JCT we joined Highway No. 1, heading towards Talk. It was a beautiful road, lined with the gold of autumn, here and there disturbed by evergreen forests or sparkling lakes and rivers. In the distance rose the mighty range of the snowy Wrangler Mountains, averaging from 10,000 to 16,000 feet, and closer to Talk Mentasta Mountain. It was Sunday, and everything that passed before our eyes was truly to be loved. It was already autumn here, and I really like this time of year. It brings me joy and takes me into the realm of dreams and memories. I'm quite sure that I could travel through this landscape all my life and more. The last 10 miles were marked by an absolute straight line. Straight through that gold of autumn to Talk. We parked, cooked, and went to sleep. Talk September 8th. In the morning we woke up to a beautiful day. Blue sky without a single cloud. Only the sun above us, and the road ahead of us. We joined Highway number 2 towards Canada. We've been here once before. That was 14 days ago. What a change! It was raining then, and you couldn't see anything more than the green of the trees from the road. Today everything is in autumn colors lit by the sun and distant mountain horizons. The road passed quickly, the last meters of asphalt road. Border control. I had a little problem here. I came to pick up my rifle, which I left here 14 days ago. I wanted to go back to Talk and from there leave towards Dawson City, Yukon. However, Customs Control did not give me permission. It is said to be forbidden to import firearms into the USA. I was angry, but there was nothing I could do. I threw the rifle into the car and set off on the dusty road. Here too I observed the changes as the seasons bring them, but the further south, the more greenery and less gold. I began to worry more about the road. I had gotten used to it before, but those few thousand miles on well-maintained Alaskan highways had spoiled me a bit. Yukon is a beautiful country, full of forests, water, and peace. It was nice to be back. Canada and the USA. Two great countries. Today, for the first time, I felt that Canada was closer to me. I was thinking like that when Cluane Lake appeared on the horizon. We stopped here on the way up, we will stop here now too. Beautiful lake, very good camping. We stayed overnight. Cluane Lake, September 9th to September 10th. In the morning we lit a fire in the stove and prepared breakfast. We washed the car and then I sat down at my diary, to which I owed a large part of our experiences and impressions from the trips. But it didn't take long and we got visitors. 2 young Americans from California rushed in a Citroën. Of course, we started talking about the car and also about other topics. So my work on the diary stopped, and it wasn't until around 11 p.m. that we went to sleep. The evening sky was full of stars and flashes of the aurora borealis. Well, it was still a wonderful day. In the morning we took photos and went our separate ways, the boys up to Alaska and us down to the sun. The road passed quickly. I already felt like an old Cossack on the Alaska highway. The fear of flying stones, broken windows, and torn tires is long gone. We stopped in Whitehorse for coffee, stretched our limbs, and drove on. In the evening we stopped at Teslin Lake and cooked something to eat. The weather was wonderful here too, compared to the stormy weather when we went up. I welcome these little changes, they are life after all. Teslin Lake, September 11th. And again a beautiful day. We drive on and on. The road seems much better than ever. We stopped at the Rancheria campsite to cook something to eat. An old man who was cleaning the campsite willingly slowly started a fire for us, and we invited him to our breakfast in return. He did not refuse. He talked about vandalism and the problems he has with people who destroy the equipment in the camps. I guess he liked us. When he finished, ready for another job, he invited us to dinner at his cabin not far from Watson Lake. We accepted his invitation. We tidied up our dishes, and since we had enough time we played Rummy 500. Around 4 p.m. we set off to Upper Liard where Jimmy, our host, was waiting for us. We were fresh and clean, as befits guests. When suddenly I noticed something bad. I was not mistaken, we got a flat tire. Right rear tire. What can be done? Everything out. First us, then the heavy wooden drawer, and finally the jack and spare tire. I changed the wheels and then started looking for the cause of our misfortune. A large rusty nail found its way to the tube in the most delicate place of the tire, exactly between the treads. We loaded everything back and hurried forward. We were about an hour late. Jimmy had already had dinner and thought we had changed our plans. However, he was obviously happy when we stopped in front of his cabin. A modest small log cabin, which he built himself without any help, was now our home. He told us that we could stay as long as we wanted. We had moose for dinner. The meat of this mighty animal is extraordinarily tender and tasty, almost indistinguishable in comparison with beef. There was, of course, enough food. An adult moose weighs around 800 kilograms, but even more. All a person needs is a good aim and patience to track this animal down. Almost all Yukon natives stock up on this meat and live on it practically all winter. It is cheap, richly nutritious, and tasty. After dinner, tea by the crackling fireplace and many conversations about Yukon and life in these forgotten regions. I think it's beautiful to live this way of life. There aren't many places in the world where you can live like this, but I don't know if I could do it. Everything here is practically free. Game, fish, wood, and air. There is also plenty of work here. However, the winters are harsh, 30-40-50 degrees below zero. There was a lot to talk about, but Jimmy gets up early in the morning, and so he goes to bed early in the evening. It was warm in the cabin. We lay down so sleep. Upper Liard, September 12th to September 13th. The next day we got up around 7:30. Jimmy was already preparing breakfast. He wanted to prepare caribou rump steaks, but we indicated that tea and pastries were quite enough. Then we went to Watson Lake. Jimmy went to collect some money and I went to spend some money. I had to have the tire repaired. At the tourist information I asked about the condition of the road towards Cassiar Terrace. I was assured that the road was fine. Road workers were on strike. From there we went with Jimmy to one of the campsites, where we helped Jimmy with his cleaning, then back to the cabin for lunch. On the way we bought wine so that we wouldn't be too much in debt. We had caribou for lunch. Great food. Jimmy then left for work, and we watched TV. He came back around 6 p.m. We had dinner and then went for a little tour around the Liard River. The sunset was our next job. I don't know, but this phenomenon looks completely different here in these parts, and yet I can't explain why. After sunset in the late evening I witnessed the aurora borealis again. Television ended our day. Television news reminded us of the world with an unfortunate civilization. September 13th. Around 9 o'clock we said goodbye and thanked him for his hospitality. The road seemed very good. We even came across asphalt, which I missed when reading the map. We even joked that it was a secret highway used so much by Canadians as an alternative to the Alaska Highway. However, we did not enjoy it for too long. A rough, stony highway full of potholes and holes replaced our celebrated road. We were moving at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour. Mountainous landscape, richly forested, here and there decorated with lakes and fast streams. Well, I thought, nothing worse can happen to us. We stopped for lunch. I think I discovered gold here, quite certainly fools, a few sandwiches, and we continued. A few more miles and road signs announced construction on the road. We went into it. Bulldozers, giant trucks, and I don't know what else to call these monsters, became our companions. Every moment I thought we would get stuck somewhere or break something on the bottom of the car. Loose ground stones, freshly driven tracks of giant tires whose track did not fit our Volvo. I was very angry with that sprightly old lady at Watson Lake Information who told me the road was fine. If I had known the condition was like this, I wouldn't have set foot here. But luck was with us. We got out of it unscathed. The construction was followed by a section of quite fast road. I drove as fast as I could, but the delay was huge and the road took on its usual appearance again. We continue very slowly again. Unprecedented solitude. On a stretch of 500 miles, almost no one. After a long time, snowy mountains, wide valleys, mighty forests, and numerous streams appeared again. Water gurgles everywhere. The forests exhale moist air, full of scents. The sun set behind the high mountains early, the valleys plunged into the quickly fading day. It was dark. But we continue. The dark monotony of the road is very often disturbed by a small bridge over rivers and streams. We counted at least 50 of them. Finally we arrived at Meziadin Junction. Just one gas pump with tire repair. A small restaurant in a mobile home. We drank coffee and went to sleep. I drove for maybe 11 hours today. Mziadin JCT September 14th. In the morning, I inquired about the road conditions towards Taras. The news wasn't exactly joyful, but not exactly dire either. They said it was a 5-hour journey. We proceeded slowly again. Forest roads, rocky roads, and all sorts of roads. Mighty trees covered the entire landscape. In many places, the plains gaped after the felled forest. The logging industry. This scenery was interrupted only once, by a very unusual sight. The entire vicinity of Lava Lake was covered in lava. Some of it was exposed, some of it covered only in moss. No one knew the answer as to when it happened and where the volcano was. So we contented ourselves with the view. Another few dozen miles and we were already passing through the gates of the highway. The road we had traveled was a private road, leading to some kind of station and logging enterprise at the same time. We were glad to say goodbye to it. A far better one awaited us, after all. We passed through the quite lovely town of Taras, and beyond it, we turned off the main road towards Kitimat. About halfway between Taras and Kitimat was the destination of our journey, Skoglund Hot Springs, listed as Lakels Hot Springs on the map. We desperately needed these hot baths. The dust and sweat of past journeys clung to us and made life unpleasant. For $2.50, we got a room and the use of 2 pools for 2.5 hours. The original spring or source is uncovered, with 600,000 liters of mineral water rich in 14 different elements gushing out daily. The water is 180 Fahrenheit hot and has healing effects. The 2 commercially used pools have a lower water temperature, 108 Fahrenheit. It was very pleasant and soothing. However, we were quite tired and therefore went to sleep without further ado. Skoglund, September 15th. We were tempted to visit the spa again, but we have to save money. So the bodies were clean, now it was time for laundry and clothing. We stopped for this purpose in Taras, where we also had breakfast. The only poor, grimy, was the car. So I stopped at a gas station, where I got a free car wash along with a full tank. I also sold one of the protective grills for a pittance of $5, as I probably won't need it anymore. Then we headed towards Prince Rupert. However, we stopped at a campsite near Quinitsa, where we found friends again, this time from Hawaii. Therefore, we did not complete the journey to Prince Rupert. We lingered in friendly conversation until the late hours of the night. Quinitsa, September 16th. In the morning, we prepared a small breakfast, said goodbye to Hawaiians, and headed towards Prince Rupert. The road was very nice, leading along the Skeena River, which reached considerable dimensions near the city. Before Prince Rupert, we turned away from the river. We passed through a hilly landscape with numerous lakes and landed in Prince Rupert. I found that all the ferries were booked. I expected this and was not disappointed. We passed through this city, which we found neat and, for its location, quite civilized. Besides a few totems, Totem Park, it couldn't offer us more, so we returned around 10 p.m. back to our camp in Quinitsa. Quinitsa, September 17th. We leave early in the morning. The landscape of mountains and forests slowly recedes. Human dwellings and small settlements, villages and towns increase along the way. We have almost unaccustomed ourselves to this on our journey through the north. I can't decide what is better. Farms, herds of cattle freely moving in large pastures. Besides this, the wood processing industry marks the landscape. We passed through Smithers, Houston, Burns Lake, and stopped for dinner at Fraser Lake. We passed through Vanderhoof already in the dark. Despite its heavy journey through Alaska, Yukon, and northern BC, the Volvo runs flawlessly. We drive forward at a steady 60 miles per hour. Finally, we are in our old acquaintance, Prince George. We know where to go and where to sleep. Just a little tea and good night. Prince George, September 18th. In the morning, we bought a few things to eat and continued on. The landscape didn't change much. Only before Cache Creek did I notice something unexpected. The forests almost stepped down from their positions. A gently undulating landscape covered with poor grass and shrubs was represented. It was an unexpected change, somewhat oppressive. It reminded me of those vast prairies in the province of Saskatchewan. Cache Creek seemed to be a busy intersection with many motels, restaurants, and gas stations. Instead of a forest of neon advertisements and signs. Zita got hungry for Chinese food. So we go. Nothing special. We'd rather go to sleep. Cache Creek, September 19th. Around 9 o'clock we are back on the road. We intend to stop somewhere. I have to finish writing our diary. We are passing through a hilly landscape. The Thompson River slowly makes its way through the rocky foothills. The road runs parallel to the river every so often. There are many fruit stands on the road, one might say very cheap. The river begins to carve its way through rocks and old rock formations, its bed cutting deeper and deeper. We stop at a parking lot from where it is possible to view Thompson Canyon. A view worth stopping for. Countless centuries ago, in the preglacial era, water began to seek new paths. With its power and millennia of action, it overcame the hardness of the rocks and formations in which it carved a deep bed that is now admired by all in places like this. Man sees his true size, i.e., smallness. Thompson Canyon, September 21st. I finished writing the last few lines and around 11 o'clock we set off. Nice sunny weather has been accompanying us for several days. Thompson Canyon was a beautiful sight and a new experience. I had never seen this natural formation on such a scale. After a few miles, a road sign announced the entrance to Fraser Canyon, which led to Hell's Gate, the most turbulent place in the entire canyon. The waters here really only boil and swirl. A section of about 60 miles became a truly fantastic sight. Both canyons, Thompson and Fraser, are decorated with a railway. On one side, trains of the CP Company rush by, on the other side, CN. I couldn't answer my question as to why they built two parallel railways here. It must have been extraordinarily difficult. Perhaps one would have sufficed. We passed through several tunnels and returned to a freer but still mountainous landscape. Hope was a nice town. Orchards, flowers, mountains, and nice shops, services, and houses. However, it was extraordinarily hot here. I finally had to use our air conditioning. I had almost forgotten about this button. About 20 miles past Hope, we turned onto road number 9 north, towards Harrison Hot Springs, which we reached after 9 miles. We practically only wanted to clean up here before entering Vancouver, but what was our surprise? Harrison is a nice, spa-like town on the shores of Harrison Lake. It is a great resort with numerous motels, hotels, and exotic restaurants. Colorful. We decided to stay overnight here. I am writing, Zita got a severe headache. And the sun quietly sets behind the distant mountains. Harrison, September 22nd. We prepared a small breakfast and hurried towards Vancouver. The valley drained by the quite mighty Fraser River is a land of pastures, fertile soils, and forests. At first, only small settlements, closer to Vancouver, settlement after settlement, until everything merged into a whole. The suburbs of Vancouver. There were many fruit stands on the road, prices mostly very favorable. That was something for Zita. Vancouver. Finally, we came across the city itself. Since I had been here before, I didn't have much trouble orienting myself. We visited Stanley Park and from there we set out to find my friend George. He wasn't home. We went to the city and from there back to Stanley Park. When I was in Vancouver for the first time, I only saw a tiny part of this beautiful park almost in the heart of the city. It is a pleasant oasis and a source of remarkable views of downtown Vancouver. We drove around the park by car and then went for a walk. In the evening, we watched the sunset. Later, I called my friend. He was home, but he lived at a completely different address. The way was explained to me, and so off to new discoveries. It wasn't difficult. After half an hour, we were already standing on the porch of the house where Yuri now lives. A lot has changed. He has a girlfriend with him, and instead of going to work, he goes to school. We were invited to share the roof over his head. September 23rd. The next morning, I went to the Volvo service. 11,000 miles was, I thought, a bit too much. The car was still running, but I wanted to be sure everything was in order. I was scheduled for Thursday morning. From there, we drove to Stanley Park and across the Lions Gate Bridge to the western part of Vancouver. I joined the beautiful road, Marine Drive, leading along the coast. A neighborhood of family houses and cross-patterned streets, rising steeply to the foothills of Haliban Mountain. The world of the rich. Beautiful houses, magnificent gardens. At Lighthouse Park, we stopped and reached the coast by a forest path. An interesting view of the city. On the way to the car, we collected a lot of blackberries. It seems that nobody here collects these fruits. A few more miles took us to Horseshoe Bay, one of the many ferry ports. We returned back via Highway No. 1. We passed through British Properties, a residential district of the wealthy, and from there by a comfortable asphalt road almost to the very top of Seymour MT, around 500 feet. It was cloudy, but even so, the view of the city was unusual. The setting sun was reflected with its dark redness in the water surrounding the city. The rest was outlined in only grayish silhouettes. Enough for today, let's go home. Zita went to prepare something for dinner, George was studying, and so I went for a little walk so as not to disturb. September 24th. We continue our tour of the city. The starting point is again Stanley Park. The high-rise buildings of apartment houses are reflected in the waters of English Bay. We crossed Burrard Bridge and stopped at the planetarium on the way. Marine Drive again leads us along the coast. Beaches, parks, and clubs. One has the feeling as if one were not even in the city. Peace and quiet. We passed through the territory of the University of British Columbia. An extensive complex of buildings, situated in a park setting and distant views of the sea. We continue through residential districts towards the airport. I like to stop at these air harbors. They bring me closer to places now so distant, at least in my imagination. Another place was Queen Elizabeth Park, located on a small hill in the heart of the city. Beautiful views of Vancouver and its surroundings. Blodo Conservatory is a kind of winter garden with southern vegetation. Towards evening, we returned to Stanley Park, as the sunset from these places is always an extraordinary sight. From there back to the night glow of the big city. We spent the night at GT Tower. September 25th. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, we are already at Volvo's service. I leave the car in the hands of the mechanics, and we go on foot to the city center. We walk through Chinatown, which is quite large. Streets full of shops with various goods. A completely different world in spirit and body. Around 2 p.m., we return to pick up the Volvo, but it looks like they have only just started working on it. It's hard to argue, nobody cares. Finally, around 5 p.m., everything is ready for pickup. The bill is only $156. I don't know. The hourly wage of a mechanic is billed here at $24. I paid. On the way, I picked up films and borrowed a projector. I couldn't wait to see our records from past journeys. It wasn't too bad, but it could have been better. I hope I learned my lesson. We watched TV for a while and then went to sleep. Vancouver, September 26th. Finally, we were able to set out for Vancouver Island. We boarded in Horseshoe Bay and after about 2 hours of sailing, we landed in Nanaimo. We bought something for dinner, and then explored the small town. Again, I must note, nice. Almost all places in the southern part of BC are nice. The vegetation is livelier and more colorful. The houses are clean and neat, the landscape is beautiful. We also went to the local arena. Young people were frolicking on skates, and so I reminisced a bit about how many years had passed since my skating attempts and the Winter Stadium in Prague. And the world keeps turning. I found a suitable parking lot. This time at the Cascade Motel, and we went to sleep. Nanaimo, September 27th. The weather was on our side and the journey to Victoria was interesting. We interrupted it only once to satisfy our stomachs. It was a nice Saturday afternoon. Hundreds of cyclists crisscrossed the narrow roads along the coast. At times it looked like a race. Houses, gardens, sea-coast, and blue sky. An atmosphere of peace and family well-being. But we were just passing through. Strangers. I think I could live here, but the distance from our world. Rather not. We got a bit lost in those countless streets and alleys that form a kind of garden suburb of Victoria, the capital of BC. However, it was a pleasant wandering, and so I was in no hurry to unravel it. Considerably later, but with many new visual impressions, we finally appeared on the main road leading to Victoria. Victoria seems more beautiful at night than during the day. It is a quite lively city of medium size, 200,000 inhabitants, full of shops and stores. I would say of European or British character. And so we were hovering here for the rest of the evening from place to place, until tired and ready to go to our beds. Victoria, September 28th. In the morning, we went around what we missed in the evening. We stopped at a hotel for breakfast and from there slowly towards the harbor in Swartz Bay. We didn't want to arrive in Vancouver too late, as we had arranged a last dinner with George. Zita was the chef and I was the organizer. The ship landed in Vancouver after a 1 hour and 40-minute rough voyage. On the way to Burnaby, we stopped at Queen Elizabeth Park to capture some nice views of the city. On the way, we bought everything we needed for our dinner and stopped at our friend's door. The dinner was a success. It was our farewell to them and also to Vancouver. We are leaving tomorrow. Vancouver, September 29th to October 2nd. We didn't leave. The weather in Vancouver was unusually nice, so we decided to stay for a few more days. We set up our headquarters in Stanley Park, from where we took short trips to the city center or the park itself. Walks and rides through the night of Vancouver brought us a little closer to a better understanding of the city. It was a pleasant time, but it also passed into oblivion. Showers are forecast for tomorrow, so we are leaving. Vancouver is beautiful to the last, and I only regret that we have to leave. The last few miles on the territory of beautiful Canada and tomorrow the United States of America. Vancouver, October 3, 1975. It was cloudy and later it started to drizzle. We drove through the city center and joined Highway number 99 south. On the way, we stopped to buy some small gifts for our friends in Portland, Filler, and Denver. We drove through the suburbs of Vancouver and after several tens of miles stood on the U.S. border. I was a little excited because I expected more difficulties with our rifle. However, it was Friday around 5 p.m., and the streams were heading in our direction. Therefore, there was not much time, and the customs officer was a curious young man who was interested in everything but what we were carrying. I was grateful to him in my mind. We passed without the slightest problem. The road in the USA turned into a comfortable 4- and then 6-lane highway. The traffic was very heavy. On both sides of the road, small and large settlements. We leave everything behind. We proceed at a speed of 55 miles per hour, the highest allowed speed on U.S. roads. It didn't take long to reach the city gates of Seattle. The city is a little bigger than Vancouver, 1.4 million. It is spread over a hilly terrain that allows the city to be viewed from different sides. Its 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th avenues are busy arteries. The streets often steeply climb to the higher quarters of the city. We slowly drove through the city, changing direction whenever we saw something remarkable. Seattle has its own high observation tower, a decoration of almost all major cities on this continent. They call it the Needle here, around which there is an amusement park and also the beginning and end of a sightseeing train that runs on a single track. It was still raining, and the city was very calm. We scrambled up a steeply rising street to the hospital parking lot. The view of Seattle from there was beautiful, so we decided to spend the night here. First, however, we paid attention to the lights of the big city. The busy Highway number 5, which we arrived on, crosses the city almost in its center. Perhaps a dozen high-rise buildings make this city a metropolis. However, I did not learn one thing. Near the station stands a huge circular building with a massive dome. It dominates with its dimensions and handsome, high-rise buildings, but also the whole of Seattle. What is its purpose? King Dome, strong wind and rain did not allow more exploration. We went to the car, had dinner, and went to sleep. Seattle, October 4th. The city was bathed in sunshine. It was a completely different view than yesterday. We went down to the city and walked through several avenues. From there, we turned to the water. Seattle is an important port, so I wanted to take a look here too. We stopped at Pier 66. The old wooden building was quite tastefully transformed into a kind of center with small shops of the busiest kind, restaurants, and clubs. Along the coast, Alaskan Way, for perhaps 2 to 3 miles, there were many stalls, shops, and restaurants offering mostly the diverse fruits of the sea. It was entertaining, but it was time to move on. The Highway 5 was not hard to find. After a few minutes we were in one of their 4 streams. I almost forgot to visit the Boeing aircraft factory when I saw a huge sign bearing this name. I turned off the highway and after perhaps half an hour of searching, I stopped at the gates of this famous factory. However, I was bitterly disappointed because the production of the 747 is carried out in factories in Everett, which is on the opposite side of Seattle. Moreover, it was Saturday, so no tours. So I stayed at least in a conversation about airplanes with a member of the security guard. He was a pleasant, talkative man with whom we parted after about an hour of talking. We returned to the highway and continued our ride. The highway went on without much interest. Only in Olympia did we stop to visit the local brewery. It was a short tour without much interest, as the brewery had only started a 5-day working week, unlike the 7-day one in the summer season, and so we only saw the brewery equipment, but not its operation. At the end of the tour, we were fully supplied with this famous beer of the United States. As soon as we left Olympia, I noticed in the distance from the field the snow-capped mountain Rainier, 14,410 feet, which then accompanied us for a considerable part of the way. The landscape began to be somewhat more interesting. It didn't take long and road signs announced Portland. It was slowly getting dark. We crossed the steel bridge over the Willamette River and after a few minutes came to Burnside Street. What luck! Without effort, we found the house number where Mrs. Steindler, whom I intended to visit, lived. It was around 7 p.m. when I rang her doorbell, but she had already gone to bed, so I postponed the visit until tomorrow. We went to the city center and looked around its busy streets. It was Saturday evening and the city seemed very busy. We quite liked the evening Portland. However, I was a little tired and hungry, so we returned to Burnside and anchored at Mrs. Steindler's house, where we also spent the night, in a prohibited parking lot.